Welcome to Hidden Wounds. For every man who listens, whether you're nursing fresh wounds or bearing the scars of battles fought long ago, consider this your sanctuary in the vast expanse of the digital world. Each account shared here is more than just a passing story. It's a testament to the fact that you are not walking this path alone, that your experiences have weight, and that even the most devastating chapters of a man's life can be turned into a saga of courage and dignity. If anyone has ever suggested you're too far along in life to rebuild, I'm here to tell you that is a profound untruth. Your chronicle is far from finished. There are still powerful chapters waiting to be written. So, pour yourself a drink, take a steadying breath, and listen closely. You have found your way to the right place. Here, we don't merely recount tales. We give voice to your struggles, the ones that prove that no matter what has been taken from you, peace, fortitude, and even happiness can be reclaimed. They say fire is both an agent of destruction and an agent of purification. But on that particular night, as I stood barefoot on my own front lawn, watching flames consume every inch of the home I had constructed with my own two hands, I felt no sense of being purified. I felt annihilated. The orange tendrils of fire reached for the night sky like demons unleashed from the underworld. Acrid smoke clawed at my throat, and I instinctively clutched the worn bathrobe I'd hastily thrown on. My neighbors watched from a safe distance, their faces illuminated by the inferno, their hushed whispers turning my personal tragedy into a neighborhood spectacle. Firefighters arrived in a flurry of motion, their hoses screaming as water hissed against the blaze. But it was a futile effort. The house groaned, then collapsed in on itself, and a part of my own soul collapsed right along with it. Inside that inferno were the photo albums from my wedding, the watch my own father gave me the day my daughter was born, the loving letters from a wife long since buried, and the grand piano I had saved for years to finally purchase. All of it was turning to ash. I wasn't just observing a fire. I was witnessing the incineration of my entire life. When the flames were finally extinguished, the only things left were charred lumber, contorted metal, and smoke that seemed to rise in mockery of my loss. The insurance agent mumbled something about necessary investigations and unavoidable delays, but his words were meaningless to me. That night, I was a man without a roof, without a bed, without a home. I reached out to the one person I believed I could count on. My daughter, my only child, Jessica. I called her, my voice shaking as I tried to explain the horror of what had happened. Her first response was a stretch of cold silence, followed by a heavy sigh, and then the words that would be seared into my memory forever. "Dad, I'm so sorry, but there's just no room here. You know how it is. The kids, the lack of space. We're barely managing as it is." I was frozen. No room. Her voice held no pain, no sympathy, no love. It was all cold calculation, a simple dismissal. I begged. "Lord, forgive me." I begged her. For just a moment, my dignity was overwhelmed by sheer desperation, but her answer remained unchanged. So I ended the call, slumped into the driver's seat of my car, and finally let the tears flow. The cold leather of the seat beneath me and the rain that began to drum against the roof were my only comforts. That car became my refuge, my coffin of shame, the only space in the world that was still mine. I slept in that vehicle for 3 nights. Every time I shut my eyes, I could hear her voice echoing in my mind. There's no room here. I replayed every sacrifice I had ever made for her. The years I worked overtime at the factory to put her through college. The meals I skipped so she could have more. The clothes I wore until they were threadbare so she could have new ones. and this was my reward. On the fourth night, as I stared up at the car's ceiling, something inside me hardened into steel. The truth became crystal clear. I had been cast aside, but I was not without power. I whispered into the darkness, "One day she will beg, and when she does, I will make sure her tongue tastes the very same ash that I have." The fire had taken my house, but it had ignited something new within me, something relentless, something cold. That night, the father in me perished. In his place, the avenger was born. My salvation didn't come from my daughter. It came from my sister, Eleanor. Eleanor had always been my guardian. When we were children, she would stand in front of me whenever bullies gathered, her small fists clenched, daring any of them to lay a hand on me. When our father's temper would erupt, Eleanor would whisk me away, telling me jokes until my tears subsided. She blossomed into a woman who built business empires, while I was busy building a family. Where I chose fatherhood, she chose the boardroom, and she excelled. When she learned of my situation, she didn't sigh or make excuses. She didn't measure her love in terms of square footage. She arrived in person, her sleek black sedan pulling up next to my old, beaten-up car, her face a mask of genuine concern. "My God, Arthur, look at you," she said, pulling me into a firm embrace. The familiar scent of her perfume was steadying. For the first time, in what felt like an eternity, I felt safe. I tried to object when she laid out her plan for me, but she silenced me with a simple wave of her hand. Within a week, Eleanor had bought me a mansion. It wasn't just a house, it was a sprawling estate with marble floors, chandeliers that dripped with crystal, and gardens overflowing with roses. Then, as if it were a minor afterthought, she handed me a checkbook. "6 million, she said. "Start over, live again, and don't you ever let anyone make you feel small again." Tears welled in my eyes, but I forced them back. I would not cry during my moment of rebirth. Instead, I straightened my posture, smoothed out my clothes, and accepted her gift. I was transformed. With that money came power, and with that power came a new kind of confidence. I invested in myself without mercy. I bought bespoke suits, silk ties, and diamond cufflinks that captured the light. I rejuvenated my appearance with premium treatments, had my silver hair styled impeccably, and began to carry myself with the air of a patriarch. The man my daughter had forsaken was gone. In his place stood a king. But beneath the fine fabrics and marble floors, there was a core of steel. Every smile I offered was sharpened with intent. Every step I took had purpose. I was no longer a father yearning for his daughter's love. I was a man girding himself for war. At night, I would sit on the grand balcony of my new mansion, a glass of whiskey in hand, and gaze out at the city lights. I would think of my daughter, of her smug expression, of her well-rehearsed excuses. I would envision the day she would inevitably appear at my door, a cheap bouquet of flowers in her hand, feigning concern. And I made a solemn promise to myself. When that day arrived, I wouldn't slam the door. I wouldn't raise my voice. No, I would welcome her in, pour her a drink, and smile. I would let her believe she still had a place in my life. And then, slowly and methodically, I would dismantle everything she held dear. My sister had given me wealth, but the weapon I would forge from it would be far more precious. A fortress of elegance, a throne of power, and a blade honed by betrayal. The fire had turned my life to ash, but Eleanor had given me the means to rise again. And rise I would not as a phoenix seeking renewal, but as a shadow king, ready to make my betrayer kneel. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. The knock on the door echoed through my marble hallway, like destiny arriving in a poorly fitting suit. I had been sitting in the solarium, sunlight streaming through the glass dome overhead, a book in one hand and a glass of fine bourbon in the other. I had given my staff the day off. I have come to appreciate silence. Silence allows you to hear the ghosts of those who have wronged you. Silence hones your memory until the sound of betrayal is louder than love ever was. The knock came again. 3 measured taps, an attempt at politeness, but I could sense something else in it. A hesitation, maybe? Or was it fear? I set my book down on the intricately carved oak table and rose to my feet, slowly, deliberately. The sound of my shoes clicked against the marble as I walked to the grand entrance. And there she was, my daughter Jessica. She was standing on my porch, holding a bouquet of supermarket flowers wrapped in crinkling cellophane, the kind you grab on your way to an apology you don't truly mean. She wore a blazer that looked a size too big, as if it were borrowed, and her hair was styled in a way that suggested she had done it hastily in the car. And her smile. Oh, that smile was a performance. Every bit of it was an act. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling with a fabricated warmth. I came to see you." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. Well, what a surprise. The prodigal daughter returns, and with flowers, no less. "Did you pick them yourself, or were they on sale?" Her smile wavered for a fraction of a second. Then she let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh, the one she always used when she was caught off guard. "You look incredible. Honestly, I wasn't sure you'd even answer the door." Neither was I. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. The silence between us was as thick as molasses. I wanted her to feel the crushing weight of it, the years of her abandonment compressed into that single pause. But then I tilted my head and gave her a sweet smile. "Come in, darling." Her eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't anticipated that. She followed me inside, and I watched as greed flickered across her face while her eyes scanned the vastness of the mansion. Her shoes squeaked on the polished floors. Her fingers grazed the mahogany banister. She was casing the joint like a burglar who had been invited inside. I led her to the sitting room, where a fire crackled in the hearth. Even though the day was warm, she sat rigidly on the edge of a velvet armchair, the flowers still clutched in her hands. I took them from her with 2 fingers, as if handling something both delicate and worthless, and placed them in a crystal vase that was already brimming with fresh, long-stemmed roses. Her cheap bouquet looked utterly pitiful next to them. "Bourbon?" I asked. She nodded eagerly. I poured her a glass of a single malt that was older than her marriage and watched as she drank it too quickly, desperate for another taste of wealth. We talked. Or rather, she did. She talked about her children, their schools, and how expensive everything had become. She talked about her husband, Mark, and how supportive he had been during what she vaguely referred to as difficult times. She peppered her monologue with compliments from me, about how incredible I looked, how glad she was that I was back on my feet. And through it all, I sat with my legs crossed, smiling, nodding, but remaining mostly silent, because silence is a weapon far sharper than any word. Finally, she cleared her throat. "Dad, I wanted to say, I'm sorry about before. Things were just complicated." "Complicated?" I cut in, my voice cool and even. "That's the word you're choosing? When I was sleeping in my car? When I smelled of smoke? And had nowhere else to turn? Complicated." She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes darting around the room. "I didn't mean. Look, we didn't have the space." I leaned forward slightly. "A house with 5 bedrooms, but not enough space for your own father." Her cheeks flushed with color. She gripped her glass tighter. "That's why I'm here now. I want to make things right. Families should stick together, you know?" There it was, the script, the line she had rehearsed in her mirror before coming here. I let the silence stretch out once more, then smiled, slow and deliberate. Of course, darling. Families should always stick together. Her shoulders relaxed, relief washing over her face. She thought she was winning. She thought the door to her inheritance was swinging open once more. But she had no idea that I was already composing her obituary, not of her life, but of her reputation, her legacy, and her name. They came back, just as I had anticipated. Desperation has a way of circling back. It dresses up, rehearses smiles, and knocks on your door disguised as reconciliation. This time, my daughter did not come by herself. Her husband, Mark, was with her. I spotted them through the tall glass panels of my front doors, before they even had a chance to ring the bell. He was fussing with her collar, smoothing it down like a handler preparing an animal for a show. She stood stiffly, her hands shoved deep into her pockets, her shoulders hunched like a woman who was carrying the weight of debt, not confidence. I made them wait. I stood just out of their line of sight, observing their silhouettes through the etched glass, letting their anticipation fester for a full minute before I finally, deliberately, opened the door. "Dad," she said. Her smile stretched with that same tightness I recognized from years of her excuses. "We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd drop by." Her husband stepped forward before I could reply, thrusting a gift bag in my direction. "For you," he said. Inside was a generic scented candle, the kind you see stacked in clearance bins. The price tag was still stuck to the bottom. I smiled graciously and accepted it as if it were a precious gem. "How very thoughtful of you. Please, do come in." The charade had officially begun. The sitting room was already bathed in the warm glow of the fireplace, the heavy velvet drapes drawn, and crystal decanters on the side table catching the light. I had staged it all with purpose, the intimidating yet inviting warmth of a king's lair. "Please," I said, gesturing toward the armchairs by the hearth, "make yourselves comfortable." They sat down like school children awaiting a verdict, their backs rigid, their knees pressed too closely together. My daughter's eyes darted around the room, fixating on the chandelier, the Persian rugs, the grand piano in the corner. Her husband tried to maintain an air of composure, but his eyes gave him away. They glittered with a raw hunger. He was mentally appraising every object, calculating its worth, and imagining what it might mean if it were one day his. I poured drinks, a vintage port that was older than their marriage. I handed them each a crystal glass, with the same placid smile I'd worn at board meetings when I needed to appear gracious while secretly planning the downfall of a rival. "So, how have you two been?" I asked, my voice as soft as velvet. Her husband answered before she could. "Oh, busy. The kids keep us on our toes, you know how it is. School fees, extracurriculars, sports. It all adds up." He laughed a little too brightly, his eyes flicking toward me, as if seeking my approval. I nodded slowly. "Yes, children can be quite an expense, but they're worth every sacrifice, don't you think?" The word sacrifice hung in the air between us like a thick fog. My daughter shifted in her chair. She couldn't meet my gaze. She remembered my sacrifices. She remembered the nights I skipped dinner so she could eat, the second job I took to pay her tuition. She remembered, and she was ashamed. Good. Shame was a very useful tool. For the next half hour, we danced around the real reason for their visit. They asked about the mansion, complimented the decor, and spoke about how wonderful it was that I had managed to rebuild my life so successfully. At one point, her husband leaned forward, his cheap cologne overpowering, his smile so wide it looked painful. You know, it's truly inspiring to see you thriving like this after everything. Not many people could bounce back from that. Bounce back as if I had merely tripped on the sidewalk, not had my entire world incinerated. I gave him a smile that was cold enough to frost the glass in his hand. Resilience is a gift, my dear boy, but some of us have to earn it the hard way. His cheeks flushed, and he laughed nervously. My daughter took a long swallow of her port. Finally, the mask began to slip. It always does. Desperation can't stay hidden for long. My daughter set her glass down with a soft clink. "Dad," she began, her voice carefully rehearsed, "there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you." "Go on," I said, leaning back and folding my hands in my lap. She cleared her throat. "You know how tough things have been lately, with the economy and my work. It's just been a struggle. And, well, we've been trying to get a business off the ground, something stable for the family." Her husband chimed in, nodding vigorously. "Yes, she's got some fantastic ideas. She just needs a little support to get started. And of course, we wanted to come to you first. Family helps family, right?" I let their words hang in the air. Family helps family. How quaint, how hollow. "Tell me more," I said, my tone like honey. She launched into a clumsy pitch about real estate investments and guaranteed returns. Her husband added details about how it would benefit all of us, how it was a chance to build something together. And all the while, I just listened, smiling, nodding, and sipping my port. On the inside, I was roaring with laughter. They didn't want family. They wanted a financier. They wanted my fortune. They wanted the empire my sister had handed to me, the empire they had left me for dead without. I thought back to the night of the fire, to my voice trembling on the phone as I begged for a place to sleep, and to her cold, dismissive reply, "There's no room here." And now, here she was, sitting in my mansion, begging for a space in my fortune. The irony was exquisite. I leaned forward and placed my hand gently on hers. Her skin was clammy, her pulse racing beneath my touch. She froze, awaiting my judgment. "Of course, darling," I said softly. "I'll consider it." The relief that washed over her face was almost pathetic. Her husband exhaled audibly, his eyes shining with a sense of victory. He squeezed her arm in triumph. They thought the gates to paradise had just swung open. They believed they were walking back into my good graces. What they failed to realize was that I had just tightened the noose. Over the weeks that followed, I played my part to perfection. I invited them for dinners, for afternoon teas, for lunches in the garden among the roses. I dressed in fine silks, with diamonds glinting at my cuffs. My hair was always styled, like a patriarch's crown. I laughed at their jokes, complimented their children, and even gave them small gifts of cash now and then. Never enough to solve their problems, but just enough to ensure they would come crawling back for more. With each visit, their gratitude wore thinner, and their sense of entitlement grew sharper. "Just a little more," they'd say. "We're so close. This is the last time, we promise." I would smile, nod, and hand over just enough to keep them on the hook. And privately, I would mark another tally on the invisible ledger of their debt to me. At night, when the mansion was silent, I would sit at my writing desk with a single lamp, casting a pool of light on the page. I would open the leather-bound journal I kept concealed in a drawer, and I would write. I documented every detail, every request, every lie, every flicker of greed that crossed their faces. I transcribed the exact words she used, the way her husband's hands trembled when he thought I might refuse them, the way her voice cracked when she spoke of once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. And beneath each entry, I wrote the same sentence. She thinks she's winning. That journal wasn't for keeping memories. It was for savoring the moment, because revenge is not a meal to be eaten hastily. It is a feast to be prepared with painstaking care, each ingredient selected with precision. One evening, after yet another dinner where they had danced around the topic of investments, I stood on the balcony of my mansion, a glass of whiskey in my hand, gazing out over the gardens. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silvery light on the roses. The air was fragrant with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. Behind me, the house glowed with wealth, every corner a testament to my resilience. And I whispered into the night, "Yes, I'll help you. I'll help you dig your own grave, inch by inch, until you are buried alive by your own greed." The masquerade was a success. They were convinced I had forgiven them. They believed I was once again the father who would sacrifice anything for his daughter. But forgiveness was no longer in my vocabulary. I had given her life. She had given me ashes. And so, I would give her exactly what she had given me slowly, ruthlessly, until her entire world turned to ash in her hands. They began to visit me frequently after that initial evening, just as I knew they would. You see, desperation is like a distinct odor. It clings to a person. You can smell it on them before they even utter a word. My daughter and her husband wore it like a second skin, and every time they stepped over the threshold of my mansion, I knew precisely what they had come for. The first time I gave them 5-0. It was a trivial amount to me, but for them, it was a lifeline. They sat on my velvet sofa, their fingers trembling as they accepted the envelope, their eyes darting between each other like two children caught in the act of stealing. "Oh, Dad, thank you," my daughter whispered. She spoke the words, but there was no sincerity in her voice. It wasn't gratitude I heard, it was hunger. Her husband leaned into her, his manicured nails digging into her hand, his smile triumphant, as if he had just won a grand prize. I leaned back in my armchair, observing them with a serene smile. "It's not much," I said softly, "but I hope it helps." It was just enough not to save them, of course, but to make them believe, and belief is the most powerful weapon of all. Once they believed I was on their side, once they believed I was their provider once again, I owned them. The next time they came, their desperation was even more palpable. She wore it in the slump of her shoulders, in the way her smile seemed wider and more forced than before. He wore it in the way his tie was already loosened before he even walked through the door. "I hate to impose," he said, his voice dripping with a practiced humility, "but things are moving faster than we anticipated. These opportunities don't wait. If we just had a bit more capital up front." I raised an eyebrow, lifting my glass of bourbon. "A bit more?" 10,000, he said quickly, almost before I had finished speaking. Then, as if he were making a sacred vow, he added, "I'll pay you back with interest." Interest. The word almost made me laugh out loud. My daughter's husband, whose wife had let me rot in a car when I desperately needed shelter, was now promising me interest. I folded my hands delicately in my lap and gave him the same smile I had given to lawyers and politicians in boardrooms when I knew I already had them cornered. "Of course," I murmured. "Family helps family." His relief was so profound that he exhaled audibly, his shoulders slumping, his lips parting in a silent expression of gratitude. "You won't regret this," he said quickly. "We're so close. This will make all the difference." I tilted my head. "I'm sure it will." Inside, I was laughing. From that day forward, their visits became as regular as clockwork. Sometimes she came alone, sometimes with her husband, and sometimes, in the most insulting gesture of all, they brought my grandchildren. They would run through the marble halls of my home with sticky fingers, leaving smudges on crystal vases, tugging at the silk drapes, and laughing as if this grand mansion was already theirs. Their mother would call after them sharply, "Say thank you to Grandpa," her tone more of a command than a gentle reminder. "Thank you, Grandpa," they would chorus, their young voices high and sweet. But I noticed their eyes would flick not to me, but to their mother, watching her, imitating her. They were already learning her hunger. They were already learning that gratitude is a performance, not a genuine emotion. I would smile at them, kneel down to their level, smooth their hair, and whisper softly when no one else was listening, "Remember this house. Remember who opened the door for you and who didn't." Children are witnesses, and witnesses, in time, become judges. One day, they would understand who had loved them and who had abandoned me, and I would make sure they never forgot. Soon, her husband began calling me directly. His voice would drop into a tone of false intimacy, as if we were co-conspirators. "Just between us men," he said once, "I really think this business is going to turn everything around. It's not just for us, you know. It's for the kids. You wouldn't want to see them suffer, would you?" I listened patiently, letting him believe he was being persuasive. But in my mind, I was making an entry in my journal. He appeals to me through the children, but it's not for them. It's for his new car, his expensive suits, his empty vanity. He's not begging for their survival. He's begging for his lifestyle. The pattern was precise and predictable. Each time I gave them money, their gratitude diminished, and their sense of entitlement grew. "Just a little more," they'd say. "We're almost there. This is the last time. We promise." I gave them enough to keep them crawling back, but never enough to truly save them. I fed their hunger until it consumed them entirely. After all, parasites cannot stop feeding, and once they are unable to stop, they belong to you. One evening, as they sat across from me in the drawing room, their voices rising with the desperation of yet another pitch for money, I set my glass down and smiled. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows on the velvet drapes. "Darling," I said to my daughter, my voice like silk stretched over steel, "of course I'll help you, but only if you prove your loyalty." They both froze. Her husband glanced at her, a flash of alarm in his eyes. "Loyalty?" he repeated. "Yes," I said, my smile widening. "If I am going to invest in you, I must be certain that your loyalty to me is absolute. Do that, and you will never have to worry about money again." Their relief was instantaneous. They nodded eagerly, agreeing before they even knew what that loyalty would entail. And in that moment, I knew I had them completely. They were mine now, hopelessly entangled in the silken web I had so carefully woven. The masquerade was no longer just working, it was thriving. Wealth is not defined by what you possess. It is defined by what you can deny to others. That was the crucial lesson my daughter had forgotten. While she believed she was winning me over, I was silently constructing my empire. My sister had provided the tools, but I was the one who wielded them with surgical precision. The lawyers were the first step. We met in the private back rooms of restaurants so exclusive that gossip could not escape their walls. They arrived in suits so sharply tailored they looked as though they could cut glass, and they listened to me with the reverence men reserve for the voice of money itself. "I want everything restructured," I told them. "Every asset, every account, every last will, and testament. Nothing can remain as it is." One of them adjusted his spectacles. "Are you planning to disinherit her completely?" I swirled the amber liquid in my glass, watching it catch the light. "I'm not disinheriting her," I said. "I'm erasing her." They understood perfectly. Within weeks, My entire fortune was secured in a labyrinth of trusts and foundations so complex she would never be able to unravel them. My mansion, my bank accounts, even the jewelry I wore, none of it was legally tied to her in any way. She could come to me on her knees, but there would be nothing for her to claim. While the lawyers were at work, I meticulously cultivated my public image. I attended galas, sat in the front rows at charity auctions, and posed for photographs with senators and titans of industry. My name began to appear in the society columns, my face in glossy magazines. I became an untouchable icon of resilience, and my daughter saw it all. I could see it in her eyes. Every time she visited, the bitterness, the envy, the dawning realization that I had risen higher without her than I ever had with her. "Dad, you're everywhere these days," she said once, her voice tight, her smile strained. "Yes," I replied, raising my champagne flute. "Some of us know how to rise, but I did more than just rise. I was quietly orchestrating her destruction." Rumors began to circulate. Rumors I had planted with the utmost care. A whisper here, a comment there, dropped in just the right ears. "She's in debt. Her business is failing. Her husband had to pawn his watch. Soon doors began to close on her. Contracts were suddenly canceled. Business partners stopped returning her calls. The country club, where she and her husband preened and postured, suddenly claimed their membership dues were in arrears. Even the smug little circle of friends her husband adored began to grow cold. Invitations arrived later and later, until they stopped coming altogether. She came to me, her eyes burning with rage. "You've been talking about me," she accused. I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "People talk, darling. Perhaps they've simply seen the truth without me having to say a word." She slammed her fist on the table. "You're ruining me." I leaned in, my lips curving into a smile sharp enough to draw blood. "No, my daughter, you ruined yourself. I am simply holding up the mirror." Her downfall was swift and all-consuming. Her debts became public knowledge, and creditors began to circle like vultures. Her husband's expensive possessions disappeared piece by piece, pawned for a fraction of their worth. And then came the ultimate fracture. He filed for separation. Oh, the news was glorious. I heard it from a mutual acquaintance before she ever had the courage to tell me herself. He had grown tired of the humiliation, tired of the whispers that followed them like a dark cloud. He had married for money, and when the money vanished, so did his loyalty. Parasites, after all, always abandon a dying host. When she finally appeared at my gates, she was just a shell of her former self. Her clothes hung loosely on her frame, her eyes were bloodshot, and her voice was a hoarse whisper. She begged. For the first time in her life, she knelt on my marble steps, her hands pressed together, her words tumbling out in a desperate torrent. "Dad, please, please, I'll do anything. Just help me. I'm your daughter. I'm your blood." I stood over her, my staff watching from the shadows. I let her kneel. I let her beg. I let her feel the full weight of every night I had spent shivering in my car while she had shut her door to me. And then, when her voice finally cracked into sobs, I stepped closer and whispered, so that only she could hear, "Ashes don't forgive." I turned and walked back inside. Behind me, I could hear my security guards escorting her from the steps like a common trespasser, her cries echoing against the iron gates. That night, as I sat in my study, the firelight dancing on the walls, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and opened my journal. The parasite has been exposed. Her world has collapsed. Her husband has left. Her name is Mud. And still, she crawls, begging for scraps. There is no satisfaction in reconciliation, only in ruin. And I will not stop until the world forgets her name. Because revenge is never truly complete until it is witnessed. Quiet vengeance might soothe the heart, but public humiliation, that is the feast that lingers, the one that burns long after the taste has faded. After that night in the study, my daughter stopped visiting for a while. Shame has that effect. It burrows under the skin, it festers, and it makes every reflection in the mirror an unbearable sight. But hunger always returns, and inevitably, so did she. What she didn't realize was that I had already initiated the second phase of her unraveling. The day came even sooner than I had anticipated. Perhaps it was inevitable. Greed has a way of growing too quickly, choking everything around it until there is nothing left but decay. And when decay sets in, you have to cut it out. You must cut deep, without hesitation, without a shred of mercy. It was a Friday evening when I summoned her. I use the word summon because that is precisely what it was. She came when I called. My daughter, once so confident in her independence, once so proud to remind me that she had no room for me, now came to me like a servant, as if the very rhythm of her life was dictated by my invitations. She arrived with her husband, of course. He clung to her as if the fabric of her dress was the only thing holding him upright. His eyes darted around my foyer, searching for clues, for hints, for any sign of what I might say, of what I might give him. He was hungry, but not for me, only for what I possessed. I led them into my study, a room I had specifically designed for moments like this. Dark mahogany shelves lined with leather-bound books, a massive desk at the center, and the faint, lingering scent of cigar smoke in the air, even though I hadn't smoked in years. It was a room of judgment, a room where men had signed monumental deals, confessed their deepest sins, and lost entire kingdoms. Tonight, it would bear witness to the dissection of a daughter. "Sit," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. True authority doesn't shout. It whispers, and the world leans in to listen. They sat across from me. I didn't offer them a drink this time. No hospitality, no pretense. Only the cold, hard truth. "I've been thinking," I began, steepling my fingers beneath my chin, "about the future, about legacy." Her husband's eyes lit up. My daughter sat up straighter in her chair, a flicker of hope crossing her face like a flame desperate for oxygen. "You know," I continued, my voice as smooth as polished glass, "when one possesses wealth, true wealth, the question of inheritance is never far from one's mind." The words hit them like a powerful narcotic. Her breath quickened. Her hands clenched on the armrests of her chair. I watched as hope surged within her, filling her veins, making her bold enough to imagine. "Yes, Dad," she said quickly. "Of course. We've been thinking about that too, about the future, about building something that will last." I held up a hand, silencing her. "You misunderstand. When I speak of inheritance, I do not mean the act of passing down what is mine. I mean the act of deciding who is worthy of it in the first place. Silence, a thick, suffocating silence that wrapped around us like smoke." Her husband's smile faltered. My daughter blinked, confusion twisting her features into a mask of unease. What do you mean?" she asked slowly. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto hers. "I mean this. I have had my will rewritten. Every account, every property, every piece of art, every piece of diamond. It is no longer yours to expect. You are not my heir. You are nothing." The words sliced through the air, sharper than any blade. Her face turned ashen. Her husband gasped audibly, his hand flying to his mouth. The hope that had illuminated her eyes only moments before was shattered, leaving behind something raw and ugly. You can't," she stammered. "You're my father. It's my right." "My right?" I hissed, my voice dropping to an icy whisper. Did I have a right to a roof over my head when I was sleeping in my car? Did I have a right to compassion when you turned me away with nothing but hollow excuses? Tell me, where was my right then? She flinched, her mouth opening and closing, searching for words that weren't there. Her husband tried to intervene, his voice shaking. "It was complicated." I slammed my hand down on the desk, the sound echoing through the study. "Do not speak to me of complicated. You watched me burn. You watched me beg. And you let me rot. And now you think you can just smile, bring me flowers, sip my port, and inherit my empire? No, you are not my heir. You are my failure." The silence that followed was deafening. I sat back, smoothing the sleeve of my silk shirt, regaining the calm that had momentarily cracked. "You will leave here tonight knowing the truth," I said softly. "My fortune will go to those who understand the meaning of loyalty to charities, to foundations, to the people who stood by me when I was broken. Even my housekeeper has more claim to my empire than you do." Her face crumbled, red blotches appearing on her cheeks. Her husband's eyes burned with a silent rage, but he said nothing. Perhaps he finally understood that his schemes had run up against a wall he could never hope to climb. My daughter leaned forward, her voice trembling with fury. You can't do this to me." I smiled, a cold, beautiful smile. "I already have." It was raining the night she returned. Not a gentle, life-giving rain, but a punishing, relentless downpour that fell in sheets, the kind that soaks you to the bone and makes you feel utterly insignificant beneath the vast, dark sky. I heard the knocking long before the butler came to inform me. 3 loud, desperate bangs against the iron gates that protected my estate. "Sir," the butler said carefully, his voice perfectly even. "She's here." Of course she was. Parasites always find their way back to the host they once drained, even when there is nothing left for them. I rose from my armchair, smoothed the silk of my dressing gown, and walked slowly to the window. From the second-floor landing, I could see her, a lone figure drenched in the storm, her hair plastered to her forehead, her clothes clinging to her like rags. She no longer bore any resemblance to the woman who had once looked at me with such contempt, the daughter who had turned me away with such casual cruelty. She looked like a beggar. She looked like what she had become. I descended the grand staircase with the deliberate grace of a king. When I reached the front hall, I gave the signal for the gates to be opened. Let her come. Let her crawl one last time. She stumbled inside, clutching a bouquet of wilted flowers that looked as though they had been plucked from the side of the road. Her knees gave out on the marble floor of my entryway, and before I could say a word, her voice tore through the silence. "Dad, please." Her words were cracked, shredded by sobs. "Please, I have nothing left. No one. The bank has taken the house. He's gone. The kids." Her voice broke completely, collapsing into a cry that was half scream, half surrender. I let her kneel. I let her soak the marble with her rain and her tears. I let the staff watch from the shadows, their eyes wide, because humiliation always tastes sweeter when it is witnessed. "I have nothing," she whispered again, her forehead pressed to the cold floor. "Please, help me. I'll do anything, anything." I stepped closer, the sound of my shoes clicking against the stone. For a moment, I simply looked down at her. My daughter, my own blood, the girl I had once held in my arms, the woman who had turned her back on me when fire had consumed my life. And now, here she was, a husk of her former self, begging for the mercy she had never shown me. "Anything?" I asked softly, my voice sharp enough to slice through her sobs. "Yes," she gasped, her voice rising with desperation. "Anything you want. Just don't leave me like this." I tilted my head, studying her. "Do you remember the night I called you? After the fire?" She froze. Slowly, she lifted her head, her eyes red-rimmed, her face streaked with water. "Yes," she whispered. "Do you remember what you said?" Her lips trembled. I said there was no room." "There was no room," I repeated, savoring the words like a fine poison. 5 bedrooms, but no room for your own father. And now, look at you. No husband, no home, no dignity. Tell me, daughter, do you think there's room for you here?" She collapsed again, her forehead striking the marble. "Please, I'll die out there. Please, don't turn me away." I crouched down, bringing my face level with hers, and whispered so quietly that only she could hear, "Ashes don't forgive." Then I rose, turned my back on her, and walked away. "Escort her out?" I told the butler, my voice calm and measured, "and do not let her near these gates again." As the massive doors closed behind her, I could hear her screams echoing against the iron. The rain drowned them out, carrying them away into the night. That evening I sat at my desk, opened my journal, and wrote, "She begged, she wept, she crawled. But ashes remember, and ashes do not forgive." The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels earned. The kind that only arrives after you have burned away the noise of betrayal, the chaos of begging voices, the weight of undeserved obligations. I sat in my study, the fire crackling softly in the hearth, a glass of whiskey in my hand. My mansion glowed around me, each chandelier and velvet drape a testament to what had been restored, to what I had rebuilt. On the desk before me lay a single framed photograph. Not of my daughter, not of her children, not of the life I had once fought to preserve. No, this was a photograph of my burned-down house, its skeletal remains captured by a neighbor in the days following the fire. Blackened beams, collapsed walls, and smoke rising into the sky like an unanswered prayer. I kept it not as a reminder of a wound, but as a reminder of a weapon, of what she had done, and of who I had been forced to become. She had come back, just as I always knew she would. She had begged, and I had denied her. She had wept, and I had turned away. Some might call my actions cruel. Some might call them merciless, but I call it justice. A father might forgive many things, but not abandonment, not betrayal. I had cut her out of everything. My wealth, my legacy, my empire. It would never bear her name. Her children, perhaps, might one day inherit a small piece of it, not through her lineage, but through mine. They would learn that loyalty is rewarded and betrayal is punished. They would know that their grandfather built his throne from the ashes, and that their mother had burned herself to nothing. I took a slow sip of my whiskey. The taste was rich, bold, and heavy on my tongue. Revenge is not sweet, not in the way stories portray it. It is not a triumphant swell of music as the credits roll. It is cold, it is heavy, it is final. But in its weight, there is a certain kind of peace. Because I had done what was necessary. I had excised the rot. I had burned away the parasite. I had proven that while ashes may be silent, they never forget. I closed my journal for the last time. The worn leather cover snapped shut with a soft finality. I placed it in the drawer, locked it, and turned the key. As the fire crackled, I whispered into the silence that had become my trusted companion. I gave her life, she gave me ashes. And I have returned the favor. I am her father no more. I am her reckoning. And with that, I leaned back in my chair, the king of a silent empire, alone but unbroken, crowned not with gold, but with the profound satisfaction of ruin. If this story has struck a chord within you, reminding you of your own battles and scars, then understand this: your struggle has not gone unnoticed. We share these accounts to remind you of your own inherent strength, your capacity for resilience, and your power to rise, even from the ashes of your former life. If today's story resonated with you, please consider hitting the like button and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that survival is always possible, and that even in the face of utter devastation, there is always room to rebuild.